Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, whoever's joining us right now. This is TBQ Live. We're absolutely delighted to be back after a summer break. I'm joined today by my co-host, Maria Chase. Hi, Maria. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Rena, and lovely to be back after a very refreshing summer break and ready to start our new TBQ Live, carrying on. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. And so we are here today on a very, very exciting topic. We've been talking about it for some time. We've been touching upon it in our previous TBQ Lives. And actually, over the last month, we have clearly seen that people are dialing up the conversation on neuroscience for business and how it can really create a difference for organizations, for leaders, teams. And so therefore, we're going to go into answering the question how you could potentially create a neuroplastic organization. Actually get into those details, I'd love to talk a little bit more about what is TBQ Live. So bear with me while I'm going to get into that section. It's really a fortnightly discussion that takes place every fortnight, and we talk about some fact which is really going to help people master the science and art of leadership in an unpredictable era. And we are in an unpredictable era at this moment of time. This is based on a book that was written by me along with 20 experts way back in 2017, which has 9 levers that can help people master the science and art of leadership. And today we're going to be talking about one of them, which is around nurturing change and transformation in your organization, something which is a headline even in the latest HBR issue as well, which talks about is your company ready to change? But we've been talking about some really interesting topics in the past, Maria, haven't we?
We have. We started off, just to give you a little bit of a recap before we get into the new series. We started off with why brain science matters. As a neuroscience coach, I'm passionate about it. What is wonderful is it's really getting recognized and acknowledged as such a brilliant thing to leverage. So it's like having a Haynes manual for your brain. The more you know how something works, the better you can work it. We also talked about combating fatigue and covered the 7 different types of rest that people actually need, because it's not just about getting a good night's sleep. There are other things that you need to do to restore yourself and be ready to play your A game. We also talked about unconscious bias, a very contentious topic perhaps for some people, and we got close to that, explored that, and then looked at a little of the neuro angle of how we can overcome it, even though we're hardwired to be very judgmental. And then we talked about getting fit in terms of fit for purpose and having all of that energy for working. And we talked also about how your diet makes a massive difference to the energy you can access. So we talked about healthy eating. So those have been the subjects we've covered. We've got some exciting ones coming up. And today we're talking about neuroplasticity, one of the brain's most awe-inspiring capacities, I believe, because we can rewire, which means that we can change our mindset, actually architecturally, in how our brains are wired. So let's get into that, Rena.
Thank you so much. And actually, so the levers that we touched upon, recapping on what Maria has just talked about, was some of the levers around one, how do you align your body and how do you really keep physically fit? Because if you're going to go through this season of unpredictability, which is going to be there forever, we need to make sure that our body is aligned. So it was really about physical fitness. We talked about diversity and inclusion and unconscious bias. And of course, we talked about brain science matters, which is really building up mental resilience, which is the other aspect which is really important. But today we really want to talk about nurturing change. So I'm going to take a couple of paragraphs, thanks to my experts from the book, just to set the context, and then invite another very special guest who joined us today for this conversation. So when I was writing the book, one of the quotes that jumped up to me and I started off my chapter off was from Jack Welch, which we all know, who's the ex-GAO thought leader. And he said, change before you have to. And for a moment, if you pause there for a second, it's so important that such a thoughtful comment that's been made, because often organization leaders and teams are changing reactively. And our invitation to individuals and to leaders are saying, can you think about it a little bit more and be proactive in how you manage and nurture change? And nurture change is an important topic because I went up and bear with me while I'm going to read out a couple of things from the book just to set the context. I talked about the business case for nurturing change, and I said the winds are changing. Who would have thought that the financial market would have sunk in 2008? Who would have thought that Britain would vote to leave the European Union and then chase the tails for the next 2 years before coming to the decision that they did? Who would have predicted the victory of some of the leaders today? Who could have predicted the pandemic? Who could have predicted that this year we would stand up and talk about climate change the way we are? Who would have predicted this? It's been really difficult, right? In 2017, when I wrote the book, there was a study that had been done by McKinsey. Was it done by McKinsey? I think, yes, it was, which released the data that about 15 or 20 years ago, the average lifetime of companies used to be 75. But then because there were so many younger companies that came in, the average age dropped down to 15. And now a lot of you might say it's actually gone lower than 5 because you have a lot of organizations that are there really for a short period and before they transition into something else. Or as some of the data suggests, some of the scale-ups close down. And therefore, we're really hoping that today's conversation can really create a proactive conversation on how to manage change. And Chris Arnold, who is the founder of Garage, was one of the people that I had actually interviewed for the series, the book that I've written down, and had said that transformation agenda has to be radically different. I think so. My slide is acting a little funny at my side, which is good at your end. And so really, and another lady called Sally Wilson, who's a business manager and a partner in one of the biggest executive firms right now, talked about how public sector organizations are being impacted today because of the demand supply and how they need to change. So we know that this is impacting organizations. And some of you all would have seen a sneak preview of my next slide, which I will bring up. But at this stage, I feel I must bring into the show here another wonderful person who's going to be talking about this topic, Jaiza. Jaiza, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Reina.
Thank you for being here. Jaiza is from the world of transformation with more than 20 years experience working across fintech, large organizations. She and I worked together in a company called Aviva some time ago. That's where we met, and our friendship has stood the test of time. And there's been a lot of changes that we've all seen. She now works in the scale-up fintech world, bringing in a lot of expertise again from the world of scale-ups, large organizations. Absolutely delighted to have you here with us, Jaiza.
Thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome. I hope we will have some interesting content for your listeners today.
Indeed. Also, this is being recorded. So, of course, if some of you all are watching this as a recording, thank you so much for watching this as a recording. We are, as we talked about, an interesting conversation on nurturing change. And this is a 2-part series. So that's something really important for us to be talking about. Part 1, and as you can start seeing in this slide itself, we're really going to raise awareness on 2 aspects. One is what really is happening in organizations at inflection points during transformation. And we want to really approach this with a sense of awareness and non-judgment. Because often one of the things that we've been talking about in TBQ Live is we tend to jump into solution mode very quickly. And that's where assumptions come into play. So we're saying, let's just spend time talking about what really is taking place. Let's just unpack it and look at it from different angles. So that's one thing that we'll be covering in part 1 today. And the other thing that we'll be covering up in part 1 today is what does neuroscience and science say about what's happening at an individual level, a team level, and a cultural level. And once we have really demantelized and deconstructed was the word I was looking for, this topic, in part 2, which is going to be happening on September 30th, a fortnight away, we'll start talking about the solutions that organizations can proactively take to nurture change within the organization. So what's the story within during inflection? There are certain levers that can, and there are certain levers that can contribute towards acceleration, deacceleration, or closure, or great success. And they're the levers that are there that you can see on the slide. It could be infrastructure, culture, market, teams, finance, leadership. All of these are the levers that can be game changers. And what we want to pull out from those levers is talk about three: the culture, the team, and the leaders. And the question that Jaiza and I are going to be talking about right at the start is, what are the CEOs and founders identifying as trouble spots at scale up mode? I think I mentioned already, Tech Nation has said 23% of scale ups are now closing down. So something is happening incorrectly, and we want to throw light on it again with non judgment. The second question that we want to really talk about is, what insights can VCs and PE fund companies share when they work with companies that need remediation or transformation? So what is it? What's that hindsight knowledge and insight that we can bring into the conversation? What are large corporations going through transformation? What are the top challenges that they are facing when they go through transformation? And for them, it could be an ongoing because they have a long time, and therefore one it's constant. The questions that Jaya is going to help you.
Thank you, Reena. I think that's a great frame for the reality that I can share some experience in. I work with organizations from startup to tier one in financial services, and transformation, just for a little bit of background, transformation is more than just a change of any one component. You really are looking to create a new reality and a fundamental shift. And that's when neuroplasticity really comes in, because you are really creating a fundamental shift, Reena. That's absolutely the nature of transformation versus everyday change. You've heard a lot about how change is a constant, and absolutely it is. And we're constantly adapting to various forms of change, but transformation is just that pivoting, that one step beyond, as you mentioned earlier, that inflection point that you mentioned. And it's just not, I think right now in the digital world that we're so much living in, the disruption that brings, it feels like it's only the technology that's changing. But actually, transformational change involves a whole complete set of changes across your business. It involves changes in the strategy, because to your point earlier, businesses need to change before they should change before they have to. And a lot of the time, they're actually forced to change. They're forced and thrusted onto it. And they really need that structure. I think when it comes to your strategy, you'll also have to fundamentally think about, do you have the right operating model? Do you have the right operating model to support your customers, to maintain that change, to support that change continuing? All of this comes into play, absolutely, and it's key to think about change with all those dimensions. Just to put into context, people, process, technology, we've heard this before as sort of the key mantra on the transformation, but data has obviously become the key currency. But all of this, as we're saying, it really doesn't mean a lot without the people. And how we get, and how I make transformation successful in my day-to-day is by making sure that I focus on the fact that individuals need to really change for this to happen. Transformations are never think about it when you're actually trying to affect any process in your business that you work in. Do you ever do many things alone? You often need operations or technology or risk or compliance to work with you. If you've got the right culture, if you've all got that mindset down as to what you're trying to achieve, what the focus is, you're much more aligned. And that's the kind of stuff that really secures transformations. So in terms of discussing trouble spots that tend to appear, is the agility and speed at which we're asked to transform fundamentally has dramatically increased with the digitalization. And responding to that challenge can provide anxiety for individuals, can provide a big stretch out of their comfort zone, can provide a high period of adaptation. So it creates pressure. And sometimes it is a focus and a trouble spot to continue to make it a positive experience. And you see alongside transformations these days, you see a lot of communication programs, engagement programs that go with the actual transforming of the component parts to the best practices to bring everybody along with you. What are some insights to your second question, Reina? What are some insights that we can share? These apply to scale-ups, to PE firms, to VC, and they definitely apply to tier one firms. Because they often face the same challenges. And in my experience, normally the difference gets drawn between different size of firms due to their size and their legacy element. It is often seen as that the legacy element needs to be changed and transformed in order for the whole business to be transformed. And actually, that's not often the case. One of the key insights to share with any size of organization, and actually with the advent of digital technologies, is that you can actually get from A to B without having to, quote unquote, tidy up your closet. So it's a real interesting dilemma, because you can often have two coexisting cultures in one organization. You can have the people that are part of the growth and are focused in it, and then the people who are focused on maintaining the BAU. And that often creates a rub. Now, this isn't usually something that startups are worried about, because they're starting up. But the moment that they get to scale-up mode, they have those same issues as a larger firm. And that's something to think about, because one of the sort of paradoxes of this is that scale-ups are often without the well-defined structures, professionalism, and defined and dedicated departments for support of a transformation than maybe a tier one organization has. And to your point about what are some of the lessons learned, Rina, some of the lessons learned just to be conscious that scale-ups, in order to scale and meet their growth, need these really well-defined and structured roadmaps to gain that alignment of all the organization behind their growth, but also to really understand how to correctly apply best practices. Because they're in a different space, and they're all for different scale, but the best practices still apply. That well-defined roadmap, that well-structured process that gives you scalability, consistency, reliability, are all well-road tested best practices in tier one firms. And those are some of the things that can help, and some of those insights that can help scale-ups deal with a new type of challenge that they've never had before. But it's crucial, because, as you're saying, 23% of scale-ups are going down. And a lot of the reasons for that, in my experience, is because they need to transform themselves. And they're in a transformative state. They're going from startup to a very different dynamic of being a scale-up. So in sort of more effective terms and less judgmental terms, what helps you get there? Now that we've sort of talked about what the issues can be, what are the things that can help, that can be thought about? I think startups are very resilient. They have had to start from nowhere, but they do have a lot of pressure upon them. And the reason why I've centered around culture and what I want.
And this having.
Sorry. Go on, Rina. Go on, please. Rina?
I have a horrible feeling that her internet connection is kind of not allowing her to be quite as live in the moment as possible.
That's okay. That's okay. It seems that she's dropped down, but we'll carry on. I think the slides are there, but they're really just as anchors for what I'm sharing with you today. So we can continue. No issue. But I'll give her a sec and see if she comes back. Because we were just getting to the good bit.
I know. I was like, the salute, what can we do to help is so essential in a time when people may feel slightly overwhelmed. Hi, Rena's back again. Hooray.
Hi, Rina. So we were just on the next. We were moving on to the next slide, Rena, in terms of how we can take some of those boil road testers
Excellent.
best practices into what can we do to help. Because actually, it's not about judgment. We're cracking on, don't you worry. But as you said, Rena, 23% are going under, and they're going under because they're facing challenges that they're not always ready for. They're new challenges, and actually, how do we get better readiness? How do we support more? What is happening now? The reality of a scale up. The reality of a scale up is you have expectations from a board of directors, from an investment, from a market of an amount of growth at a relatively predefined pace. They're not very different from the expectations that you have from in a tier one organization. You have a return on investment expectation. You definitely have a roadmap or a milestone, an agreed timeline that you have to achieve these things by. And as Rena said at the beginning, you want to change before you have to, but the reality is you've sort of been asked to change in the moment. And it's a what you can call a come to Jesus moment. It's a realization. It's a be here and now and really do it. So there's an element of preparation that isn't always there. The moment happens and you put your best foot forward. So I always say, and repeat this quote from another, but it's culture eats strategy for breakfast. Every time that somebody comes to me with a CEO will come to me and say, I want to transform. One of the very, very first questions that I ask them is, how much do you want it? Because these are not painful. These are things that are complicated. If not, everybody would do it. Let's face it. Everybody wants to be more diversified, be more leading edge, have more technology, have more competitive edge. Everybody wants it, but it's tricky. And actually, the majority of transformations fail. And why do they fail? I absolutely have to say it's an issue of leadership. And that's the good thing about it, because this we can definitely do something about. This we know that we can help with. I often say to CEOs, I can build you and execute the best roadmap to transformation that you've ever seen, but I can't do it alone. I need you to help me, Mr. CEO, Mr. Founder of a scale up, to help me. Board of directors, you need to help me to align everybody's incentives and align everybody's mindset to what we're going to hear from Maria soon around how we are going to change. We want to change. We actually want to transform, which is that step beyond that I mentioned it. You've actually really, really got to want it to really get the inflection point. And what we really need to help scale ups with is what Maria also mentioned earlier. It's that awareness. Because actually, most of the time, they're not even aware that this is a shift, that they need to make themselves first. A little bit like the Dalai Lama, I thought I was wise and I tried to change others, and now I really know I need to change myself, or something along those lines. It has to start from within, and at individual level, at a leadership level, so that it can transmit itself through the organization. It's the commitment to do hard things. It really does take resilience, and the difficulty for scale-ups is that CEOs and founders have all of this pressure. It really does, in a smaller organization, sit with you. There really isn't anyone else around you to look at. And have you ever felt yourselves, in a position where you really have to rely on yourself? You have to make the decisions. You have to make the choices. And that can be paralyzing for some, exciting for others, and we'll talk about that balance, soon in the next section. But I think that is that recognition of their plasticity becomes key. We really need to put a lot of effort into supporting the people and the culture through the transformation, as much as deploying the widgets. Because I can deploy widgets all day long, but if no one's there to use them, adopt them, and really take them forward, then that's why transformations fail, and we want to avoid that. So really sort of, those are all without going deeper into any of the elements. Those are really sort of the principles that really make successful organizations successfully transform at any level. But one, I think in particular for scale-ups and VC and PE-owned firms, because of the definition, I think that's my last key message for everyone, because of the definition of the goals, the timeline, and the reduced scale in some of these organizations, the pressure is higher. The impending burning platform is higher. The stakes are higher. And these are some of the things we can do to really help them evolve through that and change.
Fabulous. Thank you, Jaiza. That's really useful. So as you would have guessed, as some of my audience would have guessed, I have been coming in and out, but I'm sure Jaiza has been giving you an excellent narrative about really raising awareness about what's happening within an organization. There are many levers out there that get changed. And what we are often talking about is really those three levers, in today's conversation at least, around leaders, teams, and cultures. And it's quite interesting. If I was to just summarize from my own experience, and I'm sure Jaiza has covered it in far more depth. So if you think about it culturally, there's such a big change that's taking place if you're from a startup to a scale up, from a small team to an organization. I was speaking with a founder who said, well, I used to be like a startup team of 15 people, and I was getting things done, and now suddenly we have something known as C-suite, and what is that? And our team size was 20, and now we are 120. The change of the team size has taken place. I think I was there when Jaiza was talking about how there's a clash of cultures between the original startup culture to a scale-up culture. In large organization, the culture keeps changing with the circumstances and the environment. So there's a lot of inflection that's taking place, and that's the reality of today's world. So what really is happening at an individual level, at a team level, and organization level is what we're going to start covering, and we're going to look at it through two lenses. One is the neuro leadership lens, and the other is the energy leadership lens. Because what we're really trying to answer in this is now, without really, judgment, is to say that when leaders are in certain positions of power or decision making or influencing, then often what is seen is autocratic or toxic behaviors. This is terminology that's used a lot as well. And it's always more for the people who are receiving it. But many times when I'm coaching leaders, they find that they themselves are caught up in that trap, and they say, we don't know how else to behave. How do I manage my team? How do I really get work done? The VCs have put in money. We need to fund our business. We need to implement change. How do we do it? So it's a real challenge that people are experiencing. So what really is happening from a neuro angle and an energy leadership angle is what we're going to be talking about. What happens then at a team level? Because of individuals are experiencing there's a collective impact as a team level when they start struggling, when there are no norms for culture, from a startup to a scale up, or when there are no norms for culture change from a large organization that's going through massive transformation, because the culture needs to change to be able to manage that out as well. And then, of course, why is it that we tend to make the statement that my organization is resisting change? So that's some of the aspects that we want to get into now and deconstruct. So, Maria, I'm going to hand it over to you before my signal bumps me off to kickstart this conversation.
Ideal. If you change the slide, let's look at the brain. So I'm going to start thinking about it on an individual level, because every organization is full of individuals. And on an individual level, we are hardwired to resist change. And the reason this is because we need to survive. So we're going to talk about the limbic system and the PFC. The limbic system is our ancient alarm system. It happens before we even realize. It's the fight, flight, or freeze response. And one of the things that we don't necessarily we're not conscious of is the fact that we can go into fight, flight, or freeze even before we realize, and change is considered a massive threat to our survival. And if you think about it on a basic level, we are all very animalistic. It's our limbic system and our animal instincts that are going, actually, change is really difficult, and that's happening subconsciously. We may say, as Jaiza said, you know, you want it, but actually you're hardwired to resist it. And that's one of the difficulties. If we can bring that resistance into awareness, then we have a chance of changing that. And that's where the genius of neuroplasticity comes in, because we are hardwired to resist change. I am going to go fight, flight, or freeze. If you tell me about all of these transformations, you're telling me great stuff I want to hear, but my limbic system is setting off the alarms all of the time. So that's what happens in our limbic system. Our PFC, this part in the second part of the other picture in the diagram, that's the top executive function. That's where our brain, that's the part of our brain we take to work. That's where complex decisions are made. That's where we understand things. That is our top executive function. However, if my limbic system is subconsciously getting really threatened by transformation, change, difference, new people in my organization, hold on, especially for leaders, if you have started this your baby. You have put all the work in, all the hours, all the weekends. So when I am limbic, if we can go to the next slide, Rena, please. It acts like a seesaw. If one part of my brain, i.e. my limbic system, is running the show, and this happens automatically without us realizing, it happens before we even know, then my thinking, my cognition has to go down. This is the brain's overarching organizing principle. So if I am under threat, I don't need to think. If there's a meteor coming towards me, I don't need to be, cognitate 2 steps to the left, 1 step to the right. I just need to move. So thinking actually becomes a luxury that we don't afford when we are under threat. And bear in mind, the brain makes no difference between physical and psychological threat. We don't. In a pandemic world, of course, there is a massive amount of physical threat again, but usually in pre-pandemic, it was all about psychological threat, and the brain makes no difference. So change is considered to be a threat, which means that my cognition is going to go down. And when you see the slide, towards is when I'm okay, when I'm neutral, when everything's all right. Away is when my thinking part literally has no energy running through it, because all of my energy has gone to my muscles to fight or run or freeze. Yeah. It also means my field of vision's narrowed. Now, if psychological and physical are taken as the same thing, not only am I my field of vision is literally focusing on the saber-toothed tiger. That's when it was invented. That's what it was for. But what it's doing now means that psychologically, I'm not seeing the options, and I am certainly not solution focused. I'm now taking notice of the negative, because when I get into fight, flight, or freeze, the adrenaline and the cortisol is totally flooding the brain. And suddenly I'm in a very different way of being. What I'm also being is I don't want to collaborate, because at the fundamental level, why this system is the brain's first and foremost organizing principle is I have to survive. So when I have to survive, it's the airplane example. Use your own oxygen mask before you help anyone else. So when organizations are beginning to start to scale up and transform, although it may be exciting intellectually, we're having to go against some of our very big hardwiring. And that's why we're going to focus on next time how to leverage this neuroplasticity. Because there are some people, it's like Kaiser said, some people see it as a really exciting time. Other people are entirely disempowered by it and frozen by it. This happens on an individual level. You take it up to a team level, and due to our genius mirror neurons, where we all start reflecting each other's mood, the loudest mood in the room wins. It's what sends a yawn around the room. What that means is the team starts to get this collective resistance. What it also means is, as the culture, that becomes the culture. And if culture eats strategy for breakfast, that is what is happening. And one of the reasons that leaders very often become very authoritative and start acting in toxic behavior ways is because if I want to make myself feel okay in a time of when my survival is threatened, I am going to start to raise my status. I am going to start to actually tell people what I need them to do without the kind of politeness, without the kind of, is that okay, without the asking. So that's why, without realizing very often, you know, Rena was saying it, I coach leaders, and what happens is sometimes they're not even aware that their behavior has changed, their behavior has shifted. And as Shiza said, you may have a clear roadmap, but the brain looks at what it's happened before. So that clear roadmap may be really, really useful, but I haven't experienced that before. I don't know what that means. That's new. And new, when I'm in fight, flight, or freeze, means scary. I'd like to get there, but I can't. So just bear in mind some of the things. As we're talking about this, ask yourself, do you realize that about yourself? Are you noticing that actually when something big and transformative is happening, although you might want it intellectually, actually your gut's going, I'm a bit fearful about this. And we'll get into some of the solutions and some of the things that can help next time. But in the meantime, I'm going to hand over to Rena. That's the neuroscience. Your brain is hardwired to resist change, but we can rewire that. We can get to be resilient and agile. Some of that's to do with how we use our energy, where we focus our energy, because it's energy and our focus that means that neuroplasticity can happen. So over to you, Rena. Let's have a look at how the energy leadership can really help.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Great segue for me to continue to stay on the science element, because it's really about bringing awareness on what's happening in our heads, our body, and our minds. Why is it that we suddenly get into this angry mode, irritation, the whole fight, flight, freeze behaviors that we experience at an individual, a team level, and within the organization, the culture starts working in that same way. So just take a step back with me and stay with this very simple narrative, and I'm going to build up from what Maria has been talking about. So we've got two aspects, right? We've talked about the limbic and the PFC. There are two elements. There are other aspects of the brain that impact the way that energy is released. But for a moment, let's look at these two aspects. And energy, I want you to think about it in a spectrum. It's not really a spectrum, but bear with me and think about it in a spectrum. And at one end of the spectrum is something what we call catabolic energy. On the other side was what we call anabolic energy. In catabolic energy, your amygdala is getting triggered on a high alert because of threat. And whether it's a psychological threat, as Maria was talking about, and it could be a stressful decision you need to take. There's a mandate as a leader that you need to really work on. These are all threat signals that the brain then alerts the amygdala, and the limbic comes into, hey, wait a minute, remind me how I should be pronouncing amygdala.
Amygdala.
Thank you, amygdala. And Maria is always helping me out in my pronunciation on the amygdala. And that triggers off the limbic. Yeah, we can exchange that smile, can't we, Maria?
We can.
And so what happens is that when that limbic system gets alerted, the body is still needing energy, but the chemicals it releases in the body is something known as adrenaline and cortisol, something that we've all heard about, right? When at the spur, you're there to fight, flight, freeze. That's the energy that gets used. On the other side of the spectrum is what I call the anabolic. The anabolic is when the body is taking a decision but feels it's far more freer to make choices which are creative, which are powerful, which are empowering, that really help themselves and the teams around them. And that happens when your PFC is working, and what is releasing in your body are things known as dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin. So really, what I want you to really understand the science of when you experience that. I mean, Maria, I love that. I love the question that she asked of you. Are you noticing your behavior? Are you realizing that you are in the moment feeling angry at some point of time? Are you feeling helpless? Are you feeling that you can't make a decision? Think about it. That's what's happening physiologically in your body. Because what you can do is you can shift your catabolic energy into anabolic energy. And why you want to do that? Because when there's adrenaline and cortisol coursing through your body, you have no choice but to have a fight, flight, freeze response. So your choices are limited. As Maria was saying, your vision is narrow and you're in a stress kind of a reaction because you're trying to battle it through. And therefore, you are not being able to really be a different kind of person where you're empowering the situation, the culture, and the organization. So that's what's taking place. But you can move your energy from catabolic to anabolic by reinterpreting what you're experiencing at any point of time. And that's what we talk about, is to create a new neurological pathway. Because as Jaiza was talked about, which obviously I missed up, but I picked up in the summary that Maria was sharing, is that we don't know, we take decisions based on our past behaviors and experiences. So when you have a young startup, or when you have any leader who is a seasoned leader, when they're taking decisions, what is it that they base it on? Is what their past experience is telling them. And if the past experience is not a good experience, it starts creating a problem in the decisions you take. And an acronym that I often use to really deconstruct this aspect a bit more is something that you can see on the slide called GALES. So when there are certain things that take place which alert the limbic system, is the gremlin inside you, that little voice that wants you to be a perfectionist, that voice that says that you must be effective as a leader. That's a GALE. Assumption is, because I took a decision in the past in a particular way and I had a certain result, I assume that's how it's going to happen again. And therefore I take choices. So if both of those are limbic responses, I'll continue to have limbic responses, right? Interpretation is how you and I interpret a particular situation. And again, if the interpretation is this is a threat environment and therefore I'm interpreting it as a threatful environment, then my reaction is going to be limbic. And L is limiting beliefs. Before Uber and Amazon came into the scene, nobody thought a startup could go and battle with some of the large organizations. It was a belief system that exists. So the question often to really ask within an organization, again, very important without judgment, is what are the gremlins that we are holding as a team? What are the assumptions that we are holding as a team, as a leadership team, as an organization? What are the interpretations we are making with how the market is changing at this moment of time? What is the interpretation when a VC or an investor is making a signal towards us? What's that interpretation? And is that interpretation that's resulting in a limbic reaction? Or could we reinterpret it in a way that could help us look at it differently? That's the element that we would really like to talk about a bit more. So remember, that's the whole thing about anabolic and catabolic, and that's physiologically what's taking place within an individual. And here's another slide, and again, going back to asking questions. Look at these various emotions that are attached to the reactions that we talked about. And immediately you will see that you will have some leaders who show what we call toxic behaviors are basically a catabolic reaction. So sometimes when you're dealing with somebody else who's showing a catabolic reaction, it might be an idea to see how you address it. But just start becoming aware of this. Do you see this in an organization? Because any organization that's resisting change, teams that are resisting change, will be experiencing this at an individual or team level. There's anger, there's frustration, there's complaining and blame for each other, there's criticizing, there's judging. This is how, I love the thing that Maria talked about, a startup, they think that this is their baby, really, right? So if somebody comes in and has a different working style, you start judging, of saying, hey, that's not going to work, and this is something that I've created. So it leads to a lot of, conflict with the organization, makes people blocked, indecisive, start becoming a victim of saying, this is my baby and this is how I should be working with it, or this is my team and organization. So there's a lot of catabolic stuff that takes place within an organization. And all I'm inviting you to see it is that the thing that you're seeing out there is based on science. So if you start understanding this is what's happening at an individual level, if you can start helping individuals at that individual level, then you can help them move into the anabolic spectrum, which is what we really want at an individual and team level. All of those emotions, being in harmony with each other, working with constructive friction, having those healthy debates. That also happens in organizations, right? We've seen that. We've been talking about some of the catabolic stuff. Confident leaders, clear, being proactive, moving along with the changes that's taking place in business, new perspectives. How do we deal with the challenge? That's the other side as well. And again, what's happening there is the physiology of the prefrontal cortex that has been engaged at an individual level. There's a different kind of chemical in the body, which is resulting in that. So it's really trying to see how do you address this which is what, of course, we will be doing in our next part of the series. And a taster into it is really the simple concept. It's just one aspect. Is we all will be feeling those emotions that we did on the catabolic spectrum, and you will be having teens as well. The whole thing is about being able to feel the emotion, because we will. We are human beings, right? As Maria was talking about, our brain will get alerted, and the limbic system will get alerted as well. So we will feel angry and frustrated and helpless at times and fearful. But should we remain in that? Is the question that becomes an important question for all of us. I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to bring back Jaiza as well as Maria for closing comments. And thank you very much for being with us for an additional minute or two. But before I go on to Maria, Jaiza, can I bring you back to any final comments from you? Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Rina. Thank you for having me. I think I'll leave you with exactly what Maria's is got on the slide. If culture eats strategy for breakfast, make sure that you've got your people aligned and supported to take through the transformation. Really think about how they're all going on an individual as much as a team and an organizational journey, and think about that explicit commitment, verbal commitment is something that it's great to have at the beginning, but all throughout the journey, your resilience is tested. You are often going in transformations into uncharted territories, and you really do need to be conscious of that journey and of your emotions, and as Maria will explain more.
Thank you so much, Jaiza. Maria.
One of the things is the brain is actually run by emotions. We think afterwards very often. We have an emotional response, we act, behave, and then we rationalize afterwards. And that one of the key takeaways is alignment. If we can align everyone and acknowledge what's going on, but actually not buy into what's going on, honor it, acknowledge it, then find ways forward. That's how neuroplastic organizations are formed, and they're the ones that are going to thrive and survive. Thank you for being with us. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I could go on for days about this. This is really exciting.
Absolutely, we love it, and which is testimony, because we have gone over time by a few minutes. So thank you very much for being here with us. We love having this conversation. We would love to continue this conversation with you and really unpack this a bit more about how you can create an organization that's agile, that's proactively really embracing change and flexing to the demands and the changing times. That is, ladies and gentlemen, a neuroplastic organization. This is TBQ Live. We're going to be back on September 30th to continue this conversation and unpack a bit more about how you might want to create a neuroplastic organization. Thank you so much for being here with us. It's been absolutely fantastic. See you on September 30th. Take care. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.